Kevin was very inspired by one of the new games he got to play at the Bay party. The game involved connecting blocks together in order to construct larger objects. There were different shapes and sizes of blocks to use, with no rules on how the blocks were to be connected, or what was ultimately to be constructed. Kevin admitted that he wanted to play the building block game more than any other game at the Bay party, even though it did not involve handling a ball, running around, or other participants. Everyone followed Kevin's new inspiration and began discussions on how to produce blocks for the game. They went to the workshop and started to write and sketch their ideas on the chalkboard for how the blocks could be designed. Tony showed previous molds he had produced for other similar items, and everyone began to construct molds for the different shapes of blocks they had designed. Once the molds were completed, they began to test different recipes of materials they collected from the forest to make the blocks. They used chicken feathers, straw, sap, and eventually found a combination and process which produced a desired material for the blocks. They also used various types of plants and flowers to add color to the blocks. Once they figured out the ideal material combination, they revised their process of block production, allowing them to produce more blocks more efficiently. Kevin's concentration and attention to detail towards each step of the block making process was just as precise as his daily meal preparation. Once Kevin felt they had produced enough blocks, they set up a large table at the end of the workshop, and he began his game of building block construction. Tony wrote down every detail of the process in his notebook. As Kevin continued to construct, he was inspired to design new shapes of blocks to be produced. He sketched them on the chalkboard, and they started to construct new molds. Rita continued to test new combinations of the materials they had already utilized for previous blocks, and Ava continued to test new combinations of materials to generate different colors. Kevin periodically halted his new construction to check on the progress of everyone's experiments. They discussed their progress and inspired each other in the process. Everyone cheered whenever someone completed a new experiment successfully, and everyone admired Kevin's construction as it grew. Everyone realized it was a miniature version of their house. As the weather got colder in the weeks that followed the Bay party, everyone started to wear the clothing they had previously knit. Kevin laughed as everyone could see their breath in the air when they jogged. Everyone found it uncomfortable to stretch and relax by the fire pit, and Kevin suggested that they construct a shelter around the fire pit to protect them from the weather. In the workshop, they found unused pieces of wood and a spare wood-burning stove. They measured all of the pieces, made smaller versions of all the pieces in the workshop, and began to use those pieces to construct different model designs for the new winter shelter. Everyone discussed each design and sketched them on the chalkboard. After producing several designs, they decided on a mutual favorite. As everyone began to assemble the pieces for the shelter, Kevin could see that the pieces were not connecting well enough and the construction was unstable. Everyone went back to the workshop, read through the woodworking materials, and found diagrams showing techniques for making connections between the pieces they had. Everyone returned to assemble the pieces and found that the connection techniques were more stable. Once all the walls and windows were constructed, the roof, stove, and chimney materials were assembled and connected, and the shelter was complete. Everyone cheered and then relaxed and enjoyed their new warm shelter. After enjoying a few calm and relaxing evenings inside of the new shelter, they experienced a very windy evening. Everyone noticed that the shelter was starting to shift slightly back and forth between gusts of wind. After extinguishing the fire in the stove, everyone evacuated the shelter and returned to the workshop to consult the woodworking materials. They searched for construction techniques for reinforcing structures for wind and used some of the unused wood in the workshop to reinforce the walls of the shelter. When they finished reinforcing the walls, the shelter remained still and sturdy as gusts of wind continued to push against it. Everyone cheered and Charlie howled. They restarted the fire and continued to relax and discuss construction techniques, and Tony wrote in his notebook. The weather continued to get colder, and eventually rain turned to snow. Kevin would pile all the snow in the backyard and dig out tunnels for Charlie to run through. On one of their evening jogs around the park, Kevin noticed that people were playing on a patch of ice surrounded by a fence. They were sliding around on their feet and using sticks in their hands to chase and pass a small black disc. Kevin watched with great excitement as the people were speeding across the ice faster than anyone he ever saw run on grass. When they returned to the house, they started to gather all their materials on hockey. Kevin noticed many similarities between hockey and soccer. Both games required nets and goalies, a certain number of players, on two separate teams placed in specific positions. Kevin noted that the people playing hockey in the park did not have the correct number of goalies or players for all the required positions or coaches. Kevin was still inspired, so they went to the library to find more materials. They watched a video of an entire game of hockey, and Kevin laughed when he saw the players skate quickly up and down the ice, passing and shooting the puck. Kevin admitted that there was much more movement and action in hockey compared to soccer. He also admitted that there was much more hitting in hockey than in soccer, though the people in the park did not hit each other. When they made their way through all the material, Kevin said he wanted to practice skating and handling a puck with a hockey stick. Tony wrote in his notebook. Everyone went to the workshop and began to design skates, padding, sticks, and pucks. Each piece of hockey equipment was sketched on the chalkboard, and they discussed the different attributes to determine what would be most efficient and how each would be constructed. They utilized materials they had collected from the forest and began making Kevin's equipment. Kevin was involved with the procedures for constructing each of the pieces in production. He assisted Tony in heating up metal for the blades, Ava in shaping the wood for the sticks, and Rita in using the sewing machine to seal up the padding. As each piece was completed, Kevin would test them out, provide feedback on the attributes outlined previously, and adjust any aspects to improve the functionality. When all of the pieces were completed satisfactorily, Kevin put on all his equipment, everyone cheered, and Charlie howled. In the attic of the workshop, Tony retrieved more skates, sticks, and pucks. Rita and Ava explained that they had practiced hockey before, and Kevin cheered. Everyone headed to the rink in the park so Kevin could complete the testing of his equipment. They put shoes on Charlie so he would be able to run around on the ice without slipping. As Kevin took his first step on the ice, he lost his balance, threw his stick in the air, and landed on his backside. His eyes were wide, and he laughed as his equipment had softened his fall and he was not injured. Everyone cheered, and Tony wrote in his notebook. Rita and Ava suggested practicing skating first before stick handling a puck. They each held one of his hands and proceeded to guide him slowly around the rink. Tony skated in front of them, showing Kevin how to use one foot to glide on and the other to push himself forward. Rita and Ava used the same movements together with Tony, and Kevin did the same, while Charlie followed behind. Everyone acknowledged Kevin's movements and improvements, and eventually he asked to try on his own. He glided for a few strides and then fell again. He laughed and explained that he was not hurt and that he wanted to keep practicing. Kevin continued to practice on his own and fall periodically. Everyone followed him around and cheered him on. Everyone decided to stop practicing for the day after a group of people showed up to play on the rink. They returned to the backyard and relaxed in the winter shelter. Kevin explained that he enjoyed skating and wanted to practice more in the future. He looked out through the window of the shelter at the empty backyard and suggested that they fill the backyard with ice. Tony and Ava nodded in agreement, but Rita was worried about the grass and garden. They discussed the possibility further, and Rita suggested that as long as they constructed a barrier to separate the ground and ice, the grass and garden would be protected. Kevin cheered in excitement, and Charlie howled. Ava suggested modifying their procedure for producing the blocks and design a thin sheet to place over the ground. They tried several combinations of the materials and processes until they produced a few products with the desired attributes. They subjected the sheets to water and ice in the backyard, monitored their performance, and made more modifications to the material combinations and procedures for the products which performed well. Eventually, one product was found to perform the best, and they began to mass produce the sheets to cover the entire open area in the backyard. Once all of the sheets were produced, they connected them together to create one large continuous sheet. Everyone shoveled the snow off the yard and melted it in the workshop. They left some space between the edge of the ice and the fence to allow for future snow to be shoveled and a path for Charlie. They laid the large sheet over the exposed ground and began pouring the water from the melted snow over the sheet until they reached the desired thickness. Once the ice was sufficiently frozen, everyone put on their equipment and skated and cheered. Charlie howled as he followed them around the ice from the outer snow edge. Kevin was very inspired by the backyard ice and wanted to spend most of his time there practicing skating. They had utilized the wood for making sticks to construct a support frame for Kevin to hold on to while he skated to protect him from falling. He would continuously skate laps around the ice, and Charlie would follow along beside him. Everyone would watch from the workshop or winter shelter as the two best friends traveled around the ice together. Eventually, Kevin replaced the support frame with a stick, and everyone would join him periodically to practice. Instead of skating laps, they started to skate back and forth across the ice, stopping at each end and skating back the other way. Everyone demonstrated and explained how to stop, and Kevin kept concentrating and practicing. When Kevin was not practicing hockey in the backyard, he was following his inspiration in the house or the workshop. As he became inspired, everyone would go to the library for more materials. As they would make their way through the books and videos, Kevin would have more inspirations, and note the connections to subjects he had learned before. Tony continued to write down all of Kevin's inspirations and connections in his notebook. Kevin continued to draw in his own notebook, and when inspired, he would write words which Ava had written out on the chalkboard. By the time the weather started to get warmer again, Kevin had improved in his ability to handle the puck on the ice, as well as his pencil in his notebook. When outside, everyone would play together and cheer when Kevin performed well. When inside, everyone would listen as Kevin presented his drawings and writing in his notebook and cheered each time he finished. When the ice melted, they collected the water in large containers and stored the sheet in the attic of the workshop. Kevin and Charlie started practicing with the ball in the backyard again and waited for children to arrive in the park. Eventually, 4 children arrived in the park, and everyone followed Kevin to watch and cheer him on. Kevin was able to handle the ball away from them, and they all chased after him. After a while, Kevin returned to everyone and asked them to join him, so together they would keep the ball away from the children. They tied Charlie's leash to a nearby tree, and everyone spread out and continued to pass the ball in the same direction. All of the children ran and followed the ball as it was passed around. Eventually, one of the children anticipated a pass and intercepted the ball. The rest of the children ran towards the ball and called out for it to be passed to them. Kevin intercepted the ball, and they continued passing it around the children. The children grew tired from chasing the ball around, and each of them began to concentrate on one of the 4 people keeping the ball away from them. When the ball was passed to the person they were concentrating on, they would try and retrieve the ball. When the ball was passed away to someone else, they would watch and wait for the ball to come closer to them again. The children intercepted the ball and began to pass it amongst themselves, keeping it away from everyone. Kevin cheered as the children continued to pass the ball amongst themselves. They continued to intercept and handle the ball away from each other until everyone was exhausted. When they finished, everyone cheered and Charlie howled. Kevin explained to the other children that they played well, and Tony wrote in his notebook. Kevin spent the following years in much the same way as the one which preceded them. He would follow his inspirations in the house or the workshop, make connections to things he had learned before, and find new inspirations. He continued to practice handling his ball when the weather was warm and his puck when the weather was cold. He was constantly checking the park and always joined in when others were playing. Other players continued to invite Kevin to join their teams, and he always turned them down, claiming that he rarely witnessed an accident when he played in the park. He also continued to be inspired by his Bay parties, and suggested the Bay celebrate being together when the weather started to get warm and again before it got cold. As the years passed, Kevin improved his ability to handle his pencil in his notebook. He spent more time on his drawings and writing and would laugh in embarrassment when he compared his first drawings and notebooks to his recent ones. Rita and Ava stopped reading the day's events every night as Kevin began to read everyone's typing in group chat. They would all sit in their rooms and type out their responses to Tony's daily notes and provide their additions or corrections in silence. The fire pit continued to be the place where everyone would join together to relax in silence or share their inspirations. Each year, when the weather turned cold, everyone would make their way to the workshop and begin redesigning a new shelter for the stove. The designs always followed Kevin's current inspirations and changed every year. Kevin grew inspired by construction and took the opportunity to experiment with different styles they had never tried before. He would always incorporate his favorite attributes from past designs in hopes of one day creating the perfect shelter. As Kevin continued to grow through the years, he was able to jog faster and longer with everyone. Charlie started to get tired faster, and each year was not able to run as far as everyone else. One morning, Kevin laughed over the speakers, claiming that Charlie was still exhausted from the day before and did not want to wake up. Kevin let everyone in his room to see Charlie, and they told him that Charlie was gone. Kevin was confused and wanted to know where Charlie had gone. Rita and Ava explained that they did not know where Charlie had gone. Kevin got on the floor next to Charlie, whistled in his ear, rubbed his back, and called his name. Charlie laid motionless in his bed, and Kevin kept asking him, in a worried and curious tone, where he had gone. Everyone started to cry and rubbed Kevin's back. They wrapped Charlie up in a blanket, got in the truck, and headed out to the forest. Kevin held Charlie in his arms in the back seat and continued to ask him where he had gone. When they arrived at the forest, Tony carried Charlie, and Kevin led everyone through the forest to the clearing. When Wendy saw them, she ran over and started to howl as she approached. Kevin tried to greet Wendy and rub her back, but she backed away and continued howling. Tony sat down next to Kevin and revealed Charlie to Wendy. She whined as she slowly approached, licking Charlie's face, and then ran into the forest. Everyone made their way over to the houses in the clearing and did not find the man. Tony took Charlie and laid him in the fire pit. Everyone sat around and cried as they looked at Charlie laying motionless. Wendy appeared from the forest, and the man was following behind her. They walked over to everyone and sat down in front of Charlie. The man started crying, with his eyes closed and his head tilted back. Wendy sat next to Kevin, licking his face as everyone sat together with their eyes closed. Kevin grabbed one of the sticks and started to beat the drum. The man looked up at Kevin as he started to play, nodding his head with the beat and smiling as tears flowed down his face. Kevin locked his tear-filled eyes with the man's and continued to keep the beat. The man stood up and walked into the fire pit, and Tony started to beat the drum too. The man sat down in Charlie, faced Kevin, winked, and an explosion of sound, light, and color shot up from the fire pit. Charlie and the man were completely covered in flames. Tears streamed down Kevin's face as he cried through his closed eyes and continued to keep the beat. Wendy howled at the fire as it roared and rose loudly into the sky. Another explosion erupted from the base of the fire, causing Wendy to jump, and she ran back into the forest. Everyone's eyes watered and dried as they tried to watch the fire. Suddenly, a fireball formed, rose up out of the flames, and floated off, disappearing in the sky. Kevin stopped beating the drum when he noticed that there was nothing left in the fire pit. He started to cry again and ran into the man's house. Everyone went after Kevin and found him laying on the man's bed. As they stood around the bed, Wendy appeared at the door of the house with a puppy hanging from her mouth. She walked over to the bed and placed the puppy into Kevin's arms. Kevin's eyes and smile grew wide as he held the puppy, and tears streamed down his face. He kept calling the puppy Charlie and asking it where he had gone. He laughed as the puppy kept licking his face. He explained to everyone that he never felt like Charlie was far away. Everyone cried, and Wendy licked their faces. They rubbed her back and admired the two best friends.